Ajit, I introduced you as wearing two hats before you came in, the corporate hat and the ADR hat. You can try and find the middle ground there.
Thank you. Thanks, Shubir and Vikram, for inviting me. I'm privileged and delighted, especially to be talking about stuff that Jairam has written or worked upon. Although I was told that this is not really a session about the book itself, but happy to discuss about the book separately. Much of what I have to say, yeah, I'm here as myself, no hat, nothing, just with a coat and tie. But much of what I have to say actually has been said in different sorts by the earlier speakers. So some of the things that I'll do is simply respond to the comments. And I know we have very limited time, and I think we have time for discussions. Perhaps I can come in at that time. But I can't resist reacting to something. For example, the name of Partha Dasgupta came up several times. I don't know if you're aware of a very somewhat distinctive paper that he wrote back in 1979 or 1978. By the way, Partha Dasgupta, his earlier work was all on game theory and stuff like that, far away from environmental economics. So this was a time when a new concept was developed called the physical quality of life index. The GDP concept has been trashed quite a bit, so I won't go into that. So as an alternative, is there a way of capturing, this was way before gross national happiness was measured. So a person called Professor Morris David Morris, developed an index called the Physical Quality of Life Index, PQLI, which consisted of only three things, something related to education, health, and income. So you can't do away completely without, so some aspect of GNP, GDP comes in. But this gained some traction. So Partha Dasgupta wrote a very technical and scientific paper asking the following question. If you had to measure only one thing to capture well-being, if you had to just measure one thing, what would that be? This is kind of in the spirit of the Project Tiger, just focus on one thing, and that sort of is related to everything else. And surprisingly, and it's a very rigorously, econometrically well-done paper, but it's of course published in 79, so maybe later data may or may not hold up his conclusion. But his conclusion was that if you had to just track one thing, it was infant mortality at age 1. So if you just had to capture just one thing, forget about GDP, per capita income, this and that, and it was a very interesting insight. So I wonder if we could relook at that after 40 years. Second, sir, South Korea. Meaning I've just, fortunately, I'm here from a sort of a short visit to the country just about a week ago. And this is really a marvelous and amazing example in the modern world. Very few countries have transited the so-called middle income trap. That is, they were able to go from $1,000 or $2,000 to $5,000 per capita income, measured in an appropriate way, but never could not make it to the 20,000 league. And I think South Korea is possibly the only country in the last 50 years to have made that transition. You can include Japan in it because Japan also started very low, but I would not include it simply because I think it was a recipient of very massive aid, the Marshall kind of aid. So if you exclude Japan, and if you exclude some of the smaller city-states like Hong Kong and Singapore, South Korea, with a population of 50 million people, not a small country, has actually made that transition. And this, I want to mention this because this relates to what came out in Jairam's comment constantly, which is about governance. I think ultimately you kept on saying that enforcement of, transparent enforcement of laws and regulations. And so somewhere I think the hint was that if we only had better governance, which is a refrain we have heard so many times in so many different contexts. And if you look at South Korea, you mentioned that President Park Chung-hee was basically responsible. And I don't know if that is a choice that as India, we have that kind of model, because Lee Kuan Yew is also another example from this part of the world. So whether governance delivery depends on the existence of someone like this, essentially, as you said, a dictatorship. But it's a very interesting and fantastic example, South Korea. So back to the paradigm discussion. So I want to just put out one or two what I think are, let's all accept these as givens. Nicholas Stern said, and I think, I mean, this is something we have to accept. He said that climate change represents possibly the biggest market failure example in economics. So that I think we should take it as a starting point. That was written in the Stern report, which is almost 10 years old now, or more than 15 years old probably. Secondly, Thomas Piketty, his book, of course, has created so much wave. So that also we should take it as a given starting point, that the world is continuously experiencing worsening inequality, and there is no inbuilt mechanism in the market system to correct for this. That is, you mentioned Simon Kuznets, who said that actually you will see worsening inequality and then it will get better. Inequality will get worse before it gets better in the U-shaped curve. But actually the two central insights, what I feel are from Piketty's book, is one is that without any outside intervention and correction, the concentration of wealth and capital concentration will continuously go in one direction. And the second insight was that Kuznets was wrong. It's a pretty bold thing, but he said that were it not for the two world wars which happened and which destroyed a substantial amount of capital and therefore increased the share of labor income and therefore led to the U-shaped empirical evidence, he actually would have seen a continuous deterioration of labor shares, income and capital concentration. So that also we should take it as a given now. I mean, I'm not here to sell Piketty's thesis, but I think so many people have critiqued in so many ways, but it has still held. And therefore, Mr. Stern and Mr. Piketty's insights are useful starting points when you talk about a paradigm. That, number one, climate change represents the biggest market failure. And number two, that inequality is getting worse, whichever way you look at it, cut across income deciles, regions, countries, world. And therefore, so if that is the case, how to think about this middle ground? I'm not sure, like I said, this is saying the search for middle ground is almost something that you can't refute. So this is the art of making irrefutable statements, that nobody can be against the middle ground. If you can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, as you said, have your cake and eat it too. You have to take a position. You have to say that inequality is bad for society. There are people who feel that inequality, it's an outcome. But if we have, as a society, put out a position that, this conviction that inequality is bad per se. There is an economic argument against inequality that, just like you mentioned clean air, inequality which is wealth distribution or income distribution, or the skew or in distribution, is a public good which is consumed by everybody. It affects everybody. And so therefore there is a point at which it becomes detrimental to society. So if we are, all of us are exposed commonly to something called inequality, just like air pollution, how much is bad, how much is good, at what point does it become unacceptable, that may depend on society to society. But therefore it needs an intervention, it needs a corrective to the market mechanism to correct inequality. So that, and if that is the position we take, then we will, it's not the middle ground, we have to go one with the other. The other point was about the four-way overlap, which is constantly mentioned in the Indian context, that we happen to have a situation where the same areas which are fertile, say for agriculture, or are rich in forestry, are also the regions which have rich mineral resources or deposits under the ground, and also home to the indigenous people. So this seems like a peculiar four-way coincidence that India is blessed with or cursed with. But just to quote another person that I had a chance to discuss with, Ms. Vandana Shiva, she said it's not an accident. Indeed, this is the way it is. It feeds into each other. So it is not an accident that the fertile areas are also rich in deposits. So if that is the case, then we need to take a different perspective on it. This is, it's not just that it's a peculiar accident for India. This is the way it's going to be, and therefore you have to make a choice whether you want to have it this way or then exploit it. On the externality, see, if you look at within Indian national borders, see, we have a situation where, I'm just giving an example, that 1/3 of India's sugar is produced in the state of Maharashtra, and 1/3, I think, in the Gangetic Plain, and 1/3 in the south. But Maharashtra is the most inappropriate place to produce sugarcane or sugar because it's drought prone predominantly, and it's even in the best situation, it will have only, I think, 20 or 25% irrigated fields. And therefore, we have a situation where only 3% of the land is devoted to sugarcane cultivation, but it uses 60% of the water. But this is not to deny that, this does not mean that India should not produce sugar or sugarcane. It should be produced in the Gangetic Plain, because that's where it is, it's more blessed with water resources. So if you look at it just from the point of Maharashtra, it couldn't be seen as a market failure or whatever policy failure. But if you look at it from the national boundary, there is a solution of trying to have. I think this is a very intractable, very difficult problem to solve. But I'm just saying that there are solutions. This is not an impossible case. And another peculiarity is that historically, most of the sugarcane production in Maharashtra is based on the cooperative system. So these are not companies, private sector shareholder capitalist companies running this. These are cooperatives. The history goes back 150 years. And most of the sugarcane production in other parts of India, in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, is actually on the basis of private sort of enterprise. So this is another peculiarity of, I think, history or path dependence. That's just to say that we have solutions even within national boundaries. But if you look at climate change, such solutions will exist beyond national boundaries. So because we tend to think in terms of national boundaries, and because the solution will lie in adjustment with cross national boundaries. Just I'm giving an example of Maharashtra versus UP, which is within India. Somehow this thinking has to go beyond national boundaries. And maybe that's where the solution will lie to this middle ground, or what I said, non-middle ground solution. Finally, just to end with an example again, this is about, the final point is about discount rates, or this, there was an economist called Ramsey, I think 1926 or 1928, where the great debate on what should be the social discount rate. So I think Ashok said that, are we going to think about today or tomorrow or day after tomorrow, or how long? And I was recently at a discussion where one of the CEO or CEO of a company called Nestle said, the world is no longer, this is of course a somewhat fancy corporate talk, so please take it appropriately. It's not, but he was saying that today the world is not divided into left-wing or right-wing thinking, or communists and capitalists, or socialists and capitalists. It's more, he said that he believes that the world is divided into among people who are thinking about the past and thinking about the future. I think he had something there, meaning, or living in the past and looking to the future. But then I was reminded of this Ramsey model, that if the social discount rate was one, that is, you value the well-being of future generations equally as present, or zero, sorry, the social discount rate was zero, then actually a lot of these things will present solutions. But this discount rate is endogenous to societies. It is claimed that in developing countries, the discount rate tends to be higher, and in developed countries, the discount rate tends to be lower. So much so that in the Western world today, the interest rates are negative. I mean, and this is probably going to stay for a long time. So just to end, an anecdote or a small sort of illustrative example of what these discount rates mean. So suppose you are trying to price the Mona Lisa. This is not climate change, this is not forest resources, this is a painting called Mona Lisa. So we have a room full of people and we bid for Mona Lisa print. So whoever wins, and we think that the winner has the right to do anything with the painting, including burn it, destroy it. Would that be a fair outcome if we had transparent, non-IPL style of bidding? Or the answer, of course, is no, because we will not be able to include a vast section of society who should be bidding in this room, and those are the unborn generations, or even dead generations, I think, and that's market failure. So even with so these are the limitations of the market process, and I think I would counter Jairam. We will have to not try and expand the middle ground, but take a position. Now, how we will do that, by referendums, elections, majority systems, I don't know, but we will have to go one way or the other. Thank you.